The morning sun cast long shadows across the military recruitment center in downtown Nashville as Sarah Martinez stepped through the glass doors. At 19, she stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and worn jeans that had seen better days. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she approached the reception desk, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished floor. Behind the desk sat Sergeant Thompson, a burly man in his 40s whose uniform stretched tight across his broad chest. He looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed amusement as Sarah cleared her throat nervously. The waiting area around them buzzed with the quiet conversations of other potential recruits, mostly young men who towered over Sarah's petite frame. "Can I help you, miss?" Sergeant Thompson asked, his tone suggesting he already knew why she was there and found it mildly entertaining. Sarah straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "I want to enlist in the Army, sir. Infantry Division." The pen in Thompson's hand stopped moving. He set it down slowly and leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. Around the room, conversations quieted as other recruiters and potential recruits turned to listen. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Thompson's eyes traveled from Sarah's face to her slight build and back again. "Infantry," he repeated, as if he hadn't heard correctly the first time. "You sure you don't mean something more suitable? We've got great opportunities in administration, medical support, communications." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had expected this reaction, had prepared for it during the sleepless nights leading up to this moment. "No, sir. I want infantry. I want to be on the front lines." A chuckle escaped from one of the other recruiters, a sound that carried clearly across the room. Thompson himself couldn't suppress a grin as he picked up his pen and tapped it against his desk. "Look, sweetheart, infantry is serious business. We're talking about carrying 60-pound packs for miles, digging foxholes in the mud, living in conditions that would make a prison cell look comfortable. These boys here," he gestured toward the male recruits, "they've been preparing for this their whole lives. Football, wrestling, working construction. And what makes you think I haven't been preparing?" Sarah interrupted, her voice steady despite the heat she felt rising in her cheeks. Thompson's eyebrows raised at her boldness. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Tell me, what's your background? Cheerleading? Dance team?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, waiting for her response. Some of the young men were openly smirking now, exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their expectations. "I grew up on a ranch outside Amarillo," Sarah said quietly. "I've been handling livestock since I was 8 years old. Bulls that weigh 1,500 pounds and don't care much for being told what to do. I've spent summers baling hay in 100-degree heat, fixing fence lines that stretch for miles, and dealing with sick animals at 3 in the morning when the nearest vet was 2 hours away." Thompson's grin faltered slightly, but he wasn't ready to back down. "That's farm work, not combat. There's a difference between wrestling a calf and facing down an enemy who's shooting back at you." "You're right," Sarah agreed, surprising him. "There is a difference. But both require you to stay calm when everything around you is chaos. Both require you to think clearly when you're scared and tired and everything hurts. And both require you to keep going when every instinct tells you to quit." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "When I was 16, a grass fire swept through our county, started from a down power line, and spread faster than anyone expected. While the volunteer fire department was still getting organized, my father and I spent 12 hours fighting that fire with nothing but shovels and wet burlap sacks. We saved 3 neighboring ranches and a school that was in the fire's path." The room had grown completely quiet now. Even the recruiters had stopped their paperwork to listen. Thompson found himself studying this small young woman with new interest, noting the calluses on her hands and the steady way she met his gaze. "The next year," Sarah continued, "our neighbor's son got pinned under his tractor when it rolled in a ditch. I was the only one around when it happened. I used to come along and a log to lever that tractor up enough for him to crawl out. Took me 40 minutes, and he was unconscious for most of it. I kept him breathing until the paramedics arrived." Thompson set his pen down completely now, his expression more serious. That's admirable, miss. But Combat situations are different, I know, Sarah finished. But here's what I learned growing up. When something needs doing, you do it. You don't worry about whether you're big enough or strong enough or tough enough. You figure out how to get it done. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She placed it on Thompson's desk where he could see it. The image showed a young woman in military dress uniform, standing proudly beside an American flag. "That's my sister, Maria," Sarah said softly. "She was a combat medic in Afghanistan. She died 3 years ago when her convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. She was trying to reach a wounded soldier when the second device went off." Thompson picked up the photograph carefully, studying the face that bore a strong resemblance to the young woman standing before him. The room remained silent, the weight of Sarah's words settling over everyone present. "Maria wrote to me every week when she was deployed," Sarah continued. "She told me about the firefights, the fear, the exhaustion. But she also told me about the moments that mattered. The times when her training and her courage made the difference between someone going home to their family or not. She said the size of your heart mattered more than the size of your body." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm not here to prove something or make a point. I'm here because I believe I can serve my country effectively as an infantry soldier. I'm here because Maria taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Thompson handed the photograph back to her. His demeanor completely changed. The amusement was gone, replaced by something that looked like respect. "Miss Martinez, what you're asking for isn't easy. Infantry training is designed to break people down and build them back up. It's physical, mental, and emotional torture disguised as preparation. I understand that, sir. Do you?" He leaned forward again, but this time his tone was serious rather than condescending. "Because once you sign these papers, there's no going back. You'll be held to the same standards as every other infantry recruit. No special treatment, no allowances made for your size or gender. You'll succeed or fail on your own merit." Sarah straightened to her full height, which admittedly wasn't much. "That's all I'm asking for, sir. A fair chance to prove myself." Thompson studied her for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. Around the room, the other recruits and staff waited to see what would happen next. Finally, he reached for a thick stack of enlistment papers. "All right, Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a note of grudging admiration. "Let's see what you're made of." As Sarah began filling out the paperwork, she couldn't help but notice that the room remained unusually quiet. The snickers and whispered comments had stopped entirely. Some of the male recruits were looking at her with what might have been respect, while others seemed deep in thought about their own motivations for enlisting. What none of them knew, what Sarah herself wouldn't discover for months to come, was that her journey to this recruitment center had been anything but random. The skills she would need, the mental toughness that would serve her in the trials ahead, had been building for years through experiences that seemed unrelated but would prove invaluable in ways no one could predict. The first test would come sooner than anyone expected. Fort Benning, Georgia, greeted Sarah Martinez with the kind of humidity that made breathing feel like drinking soup. The bus that carried her and 37 other new recruits pulled through the main gates at precisely 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning in June. As they disembarked, the Georgia sun was already promising another scorching day that would test everyone's limits. Drill Sergeant Williams stood waiting for them on the tarmac, his presence commanding immediate attention despite his relatively modest height. What he lacked in physical stature, he made up for in intensity. His voice, when he spoke, carried the kind of authority that comes from 15 years of molding civilians into soldiers. "Listen up, recruits," Williams bellowed, his words cutting through the morning air like a blade. "For the next 14 weeks, I own you. Your comfortable civilian lives are over. You will be pushed harder than you've ever been pushed before. Some of you will quit. Some of you will fail. Some of you will discover strength you never knew you had." Sarah stood in formation with the other recruits, her duffel bag at her feet, her expression carefully neutral. Around her, she could feel the nervous energy radiating from her fellow soldiers-to-be. Most were young men, though there were a handful of other women scattered throughout the group. What struck her immediately was how different military bearing felt from anything she had experienced before. "Martinez," Williams called out, consulting the roster in his hand. Yes, drill sergeant. Sarah responded, stepping forward as instructed. Williams looked her up and down with the kind of assessment that seemed to catalog every detail in seconds. You're the one who specifically requested infantry assignment. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. Yes, drill sergeant. A murmur rippled through the formation behind her. Apparently, word of her unusual request had already spread through the training cadre. Williams stepped closer, close enough that she could see the combat ribbons on his uniform and the small scar that ran along his left jawline. Tell me, Martinez, what makes you think you belong in the infantry? Sarah had rehearsed this moment countless times during the bus ride from Nashville. Drill sergeant, I believe I have the mental toughness and determination required for infantry service. I'm here to prove that through my actions, not my words. Williams studied her for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Finally, he nodded once and stepped back. We'll see about that, recruit. We'll definitely see about that. The first weeks of basic training blurred together in a haze of physical challenges, classroom instruction, and constant evaluation. Every morning began at 0500 with reveille, followed immediately by physical training that left even the strongest recruits gasping for breath. Sarah quickly learned that her smaller size could be both an advantage and a disadvantage, depending on the task at hand. During obstacle course training, she discovered that her ranch-developed agility served her well, while larger recruits struggled with balance beams and rope climbs that required finesse rather than brute strength. Sarah moved with a fluid confidence that caught the attention of the training staff. Her hands, calloused from years of ranch work, gripped ropes and climbing walls without the blisters that plagued many of her fellow recruits. The rifle range presented her first major test. Infantry soldiers lived and died by their marksmanship skills, and Sarah knew that failure here would likely end her infantry aspirations before they truly began. She had grown up hunting with her father, but military shooting was an entirely different discipline. The M16 rifle felt foreign in her hands during those first sessions, its weight and balance unlike the hunting rifle she was accustomed to. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez ran the marksmanship program with the precision of a Swiss clockmaker. A Vietnam veteran with weathered hands and patient eyes, he had been training soldiers to shoot for nearly 2 decades. On Sarah's third day at the range, he noticed her struggling with her stance and approach. Martinez, he called out during a break in firing. Front and center. Sarah jogged over, her rifle held at port arms as regulations required. Rodriguez gestured for her to take a prone shooting position on the nearby mat. Show me your natural shooting stance, he instructed. Sarah dropped to the ground and assumed what felt comfortable to her, a position developed through years of hunting prairie dogs and coyotes on the ranch. Rodriguez watched carefully, noting the way she positioned her body and gripped the rifle. Interesting, he murmured, almost to himself. You're fighting the weapon instead of working with it. Your hunting experience is actually working against you here because you're trying to adapt military techniques to civilian habits. He knelt beside her, making small adjustments to her position. The M16 isn't a hunting rifle. It's a tool of war designed for sustained fire and combat conditions. You need to let it teach you how to shoot it. Over the following days, Rodriguez worked with Sarah individually after the regular training sessions ended. He helped her unlearn civilian shooting habits and rebuild her technique from the ground up. The process was frustrating and sometimes demoralizing, especially when recruits who had never fired a weapon before seemed to progress faster than she did. Patience, Martinez, Rodriguez would say when her frustration showed. Excellence is built one shot at a time. Your foundation is solid, but we need to modify the structure. The breakthrough came during the 4th week of training. Sarah was on the firing line during qualification week, the test that would determine whether she could continue in the infantry program. The targets were set at varying distances, and each shot counted toward a score that would follow her throughout her military career. As she settled into her shooting position for the final string of fire, Sarah felt something click into place. The rifle no longer felt foreign in her hands. Her breathing steadied, her heart rate dropped, and the world narrowed to the sight picture in front of her. She squeezed the trigger with the steady pressure Rodriguez had drilled into her, and the rifle responded with a satisfying crack. When the targets were scored, Sarah had achieved expert marksman status with a score of 389 out of a possible 400 points. It was the highest score in her training company and the third highest score Rodriguez had seen that year. More importantly for Sarah, it silenced the whispers about whether she belonged in infantry training. But marksmanship was only one test among many. The physical fitness evaluations came regularly, measuring everything from push-ups and sit-ups to long-distance running and load-bearing marches. Sarah's smaller frame meant she had to work twice as hard as her larger counterparts to meet the same absolute standards, but she attacked each challenge with a determination that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. The overnight field exercises proved particularly challenging. Carrying a full combat load while navigating unfamiliar terrain in darkness required a combination of physical endurance, mental toughness, and tactical awareness that pushed everyone to their limits. During one memorable exercise, Sarah's squad became lost during a night navigation course when their compass malfunctioned. While other squad members argued about direction and blamed each other for the mistake, Sarah quietly studied the stars overhead and the subtle terrain features around them. Her years of working cattle in remote pastures had taught her to read the landscape in ways that couldn't be learned from textbooks. "Follow me," she said quietly, shouldering her pack and heading off in what seemed to several squad members like a completely wrong direction. "Martinez, the rally point is that way," protested Jenkins, a recruit from Chicago who had never seen a night sky unobscured by city lights. "No," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. "It's not." 2 hours later, they emerged from a tree line to find themselves exactly where they were supposed to be, while other squads were still wandering in the darkness or had been forced to call for assistance. The training cadre took note of Sarah's land navigation skills, adding another check mark to her growing list of competencies. As the weeks progressed, Sarah began to notice changes in how the other recruits treated her. The initial skepticism and occasional open hostility gave way to grudging respect, and eventually to something approaching acceptance. She had proven herself capable of meeting the same standards applied to everyone else. But, more than that, she had demonstrated the kind of quiet leadership that military organizations value above almost everything else. The crucible exercise that concluded basic training would test everything they had learned over the previous 14 weeks. It was a 3-day field exercise that combined combat scenarios, survival skills, physical endurance, and mental toughness into a final examination that determined who would graduate as soldiers and who would be recycled for additional training. As Sarah prepared her equipment for the exercise, she reflected on how much had changed since that morning at the recruitment center in Nashville. The young woman who had stood before Sergeant Thompson asking for a chance to prove herself was still there, but she had been tempered by training into something harder and more focused. What she didn't know was that her reputation had begun to spread beyond the confines of basic training. Instructors who had worked with thousands of recruits over the years were taking note of her unique combination of skills and determination. Word was quietly making its way up the chain of command about the small recruit from Texas who might be something special. The final test was about to begin, and, with it, the next phase of Sarah Martinez's transformation from civilian to soldier would be complete. But her real journey was just beginning. 6 months after graduating from basic training, Specialist Sarah Martinez found herself in a place she never could have imagined that morning in the Nashville Recruitment Center. She was standing in a secure briefing room at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, facing a panel that included 2 colonels, a brigadier general, and representatives from units whose very existence was classified information. The journey from basic training graduate to this moment had been unexpected and swift. After her exemplary performance at Fort Benning, Sarah had been assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, where her skills continued to develop at an accelerated pace. Her squad leaders noted her unusual combination of technical proficiency and intuitive tactical awareness. Her battalion commander recommended her for advanced sniper training after she consistently outperformed seasoned soldiers during combat marksmanship exercises. Sniper school at Fort Benning was where Sarah truly found her calling. The program combined extreme physical demands with intellectual challenges that went far beyond basic marksmanship. Students learned advanced ballistics, weather reading, camouflage, and concealment, surveillance techniques, and the psychological aspects of precision shooting that separated snipers from regular infantry. The course had a 60% failure rate, with students dropping out due to everything from physical exhaustion to the mental pressure of making shots that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Sarah not only completed the program, but graduated second in her class, earning the respect of instructors who had initially questioned whether someone of her size could handle the physical demands of carrying precision rifle systems across extended distances. Her reputation was sealed during a training exercise in the North Carolina wilderness. The scenario involved a simulated hostage rescue where sniper teams were tasked with eliminating multiple targets simultaneously to prevent civilian casualties. The targets were represented by balloons attached to mannequins positioned at various distances and partially concealed by vegetation. Sarah and her spotter, Sergeant First Class David Wong, had been assigned the most challenging target, a balloon positioned 847 meters away, partially obscured by tree branches, and requiring a shot through a gap no larger than a dinner plate. Environmental conditions included variable crosswinds and lighting that shifted constantly as clouds moved across the sun. As the teams prepared for the synchronized shot, Sarah settled into her shooting position behind her M24 sniper weapon system. The rifle, with its attached Leopold scope and bipod, weighed nearly 17 pounds and was longer than Sarah was tall. To outside observers, it looked almost comical to see someone so small behind such a large weapon system. Wong, lying beside her with spotting scope and range-finding equipment, whispered the final calculations. Wind 4 miles per hour, left to right. Target partially obscured. You've got about a 6-inch window when the wind dies down. Sarah controlled her breathing and watched the vegetation around the target, reading the wind patterns like a language she had learned to speak fluently. The moment came suddenly. The wind stilled, the branches stopped swaying, and the target was clearly visible through her scope. The rifle cracked once, and 847 meters away, the balloon disappeared. Hit, Wong confirmed through his spotting scope. Dead center. But what impressed the evaluators wasn't just the accuracy of the shot. It was the fact that Sarah had fired first among all the sniper teams, yet had waited for the perfect conditions rather than rushing her shot. Her patience and precision had set the standard for the entire exercise. 3 weeks later, she received orders that surprised everyone in her chain of command. She was being temporarily assigned to a joint training exercise involving multiple special operations units. The exercise was classified, and even her commanding officer wasn't sure exactly what role she would play. That assignment led to her current situation, standing at attention in front of a panel that represented some of the most elite units in the military. Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, a small woman with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, reviewed the file in front of her before looking up at Sarah. Specialist Martinez, General Hayes began, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from 3 decades of military service. Your record since enlisting has been impressive. Expert marksman, distinguished graduate of sniper school, perfect performance evaluations. Your instructors describe you as having exceptional situational awareness and an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics. Sarah remained at attention, uncertain where this conversation was heading. Thank you, General. Tell me, Hayes continued, what do you know about special operations? Only what I've learned through general military education, General. I know they conduct missions that require specialized training and unique skill sets. Hayes nodded approvingly. Honest answer. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. She gestured for Sarah to take a seat, a courtesy that surprised everyone present. We've been developing a program that takes advantage of certain, overlooked capabilities in our personnel. The reality is that modern warfare often requires operators who can blend into environments where traditional special operations personnel might stand out. Your combination of skills, along with certain physical characteristics that our adversaries might underestimate, makes you a potential candidate for some very specialized training. Colonel James Mitchell, sitting to Hayes's left, leaned forward. What the general is describing is a program that trains operators for deep cover reconnaissance and precision engagement in non-permissive environments. Urban areas, civilian populations, situations where the enemy doesn't expect a military threat. Sarah processed this information carefully. Are you asking me to volunteer for something, sir? We are, Hayes confirmed. But I want you to understand what you'd be volunteering for. The training is more difficult than anything you've experienced. The missions would involve significant personal risk. And, if you succeed, your existence would become classified information. Your family would know you serve in the military, but they couldn't know what you actually do. The room fell silent as Sarah considered the implications. She thought about her sister Maria, about the photograph she still carried in her wallet, about the conversation with Sergeant Thompson that had started this entire journey. General, she said finally, can you tell me how this program would serve our country's interests? Hayes smiled for the first time during the briefing. Direct question. I like that. She opened another folder on the table. There are situations developing around the world where traditional military responses are either inappropriate or impossible. Places where a single person with the right skills and training could gather intelligence or eliminate threats that would otherwise require large-scale military operations with significant risk to civilian populations. The kind of situations, Colonel Mitchell added, where Maria's medical training wouldn't have been enough. Where what's needed is someone who can reach targets that no one else can reach, make shots that no one else can make, and disappear before anyone knows what happened. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this was why she had pushed so hard to get here. What would I need to do? First, Hayes replied, you would attend a 6-month training program that makes sniper school look like basic training. You'd learn languages, advanced surveillance techniques, close-quarters combat, infiltration and exfiltration methods, and psychological operations. Most importantly, you'd learn to think like your enemies think, to blend into environments where discovery means death. She paused, studying Sarah's expression. Second, you'd be required to sign agreements that would classify your existence for the next 10 years. Your family would know you're alive, but they couldn't know where you are or what you're doing. You'd essentially disappear from normal military records. And if I succeed in the training? Hayes and Mitchell exchanged a look before Hayes answered. If you succeed, you'd become part of something that doesn't officially exist. A unit that handles problems other units can't handle. You'd work alone or in very small teams, with minimal support and maximum autonomy. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this room, from the ranch in Texas to the recruitment center in Nashville to this classified briefing room at Fort Bragg. Every step had been a test, every challenge an opportunity to prove herself capable of more than others expected. General, she said quietly, I need to ask one question. Go ahead. The name Black Talon that I've heard whispered around this base, is that related to this program? The silence that followed was deafening. General Hayes set down her pen and looked directly at Sarah for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Where did you hear that name, Specialist? Some of the instructors at sniper school, General. They thought I couldn't hear them, but they were discussing whether someone like me could handle what they called Black Talon protocols. Hayes turned to Colonel Mitchell, who nodded almost imperceptibly. When she looked back at Sarah, her expression had changed completely. Specialist Martinez, she said slowly, what I'm about to say cannot be repeated under any circumstances. The Black Talon program is our most classified special operations initiative. It trains operators for missions that officially never happen, in places that we're officially not supposed to be, against targets that officially don't exist. She stood up, and everyone else in the room followed suit. The question isn't whether you're ready for Black Talon training. The question is whether Black Talon training is ready for you. As Sarah stood at attention in that briefing room, she realized that her journey from the laughingstock of a recruitment center to this moment was just the beginning. The real test was about to start, and everything that had come before was merely preparation for a mission she couldn't yet imagine. The general's silence said everything that words could not. Sarah Martinez was about to disappear into a world where her sister's sacrifice would be honored in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged, where her determination to serve would be tested in ways that would redefine what service means. The young woman who had once been laughed at for requesting infantry assignment was about to become something that officially didn't exist, something that enemies would fear without ever knowing her name. Black Talon was waiting.